Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Morning again. I want to welcome you to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. We take this opportunity to introduce ourselves to each other. My name is Howard.
Kay.
Mohammed.
Carl.
George.
Ahmed.
Joel.
Dean.
Jay.
Sue.
Evan.
Long. Darren.
Robert.
Marty. Rick.
Paul. Bob.
Todd.
Shirky.
Lee.
Paul.
Max.
Jack.
Lynn.
Randall.
Edmund. Michael.
Bill.
Douglas. Ray.
Robert.
Peter. Frank.
Lucas.
Bud.
Jim.
Steve. Carl.
Paul. Art.
Wow. Wonderful. Anyone here for the first time? Introduce yourselves again. Evan and
Frank.
Carl.
Robert. I've been here many years ago, but that's listening.
Welcome back.
Shirky.
Yeah. It's a delight to have you.
Yeah, another one.
And another one. Welcome. Well, we're delighted, Scott, to have you this day. It's the first time I have met you, and I have a fairly extensive bio.
Oh, don't read that.
So I won't read
Just
that.
a bunch of words.
But needless to say, we're privileged to have you in our presence this day. We open our hearts to your teaching.
Thank you. I haven't been here for a while. How many were here last time I was here? Just 3. Wow. Hi, how are you? Good to see you. So then I'll just say a couple of words about my lineage and how I teach. This will be interesting for Shuki because he met me dancing on a bar half naked. So
He was half naked?
I was only half naked.
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
Disappointing.
My teacher is the head of the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism, which is the oldest school of Tibetan Buddhism. He's the supreme patriarch of that school, and as such one of the 4 High Lamas of Tibet, and very close with the Dalai Lama. I've worked with him for about 11 years now. He instructed me to teach Buddhism about maybe 7 years ago. And I thought, maybe I'd get away with teaching just basic Buddhism, but he said, no, I want you to teach everything, because in teaching you learn so much about yourself, and you learn so much about the Dharma by presenting it to others. So I don't come here today to say by any means that I have a great handle or grasp on Buddhism. I've studied Buddhism for 26 years or so. But some days I feel that I got it, and some days I feel that I just don't. The best I can hope to do is to share a few words, and then maybe we can have a discussion about those words. I think it was last year in 2001, you said? Somebody sent an email to me, which seems like a very long time ago. And I'll tell you the reason is not just because I was busy and traveling and promoting a book and doing all these things, but I was struggling with Mara, which can only be described as Mara. How many of you have encountered the word Mara in your practice, in your studies? Okay, so most of you know. In its general sense, Mara can be described as that power which is opposed to enlightenment. So it is that which thwarts spiritual attainment. That's in its broadest sense. When you read the sutras and read the stories about the Buddha's gradual path to enlightenment, you see that Mara is a prominent figure. And I think we often substitute our concepts of the devil onto Mara and then just therefore kind of write it off or skip over those stories. But I think they're critically important in our practice. And I think they're important to meditate on. We see Mara popping up in the life of the prince who later became the Buddha on a number of occasions. but certainly on every important occasion. So at the time where Buddha was contemplating leaving the palace and leaving the life that he had known, we see Mara and the Buddha struggling. We see Mara interceding when the Buddha tried to leave the palace during what was called the Great Renunciation, giving up that life and taking up the spiritual life. Mara said, "No, stay where you are because you're about to inherit the earth." And the Buddha, of course, persevered in his mission because he wanted to really conquer for the hearts of men and gods and not control the world. And then we see the most important story of Mara, and I gave a teaching on that here once, I believe. When the Buddha finally determined that he was going to become enlightened, and he tried everything for 6 years, almost 7 full years, tried starving himself and all these things against the body, every kind of meditation technique, but nothing really brought about the change that he wanted. So the Buddha sat under a tree and he finally decided, "I'm going to conquer everything." And he went through different stages, called often different trances. So he became deeper and deeper aware, more concentrated, and into higher and higher realms of wisdom. And as he approached enlightenment, extinguishing, finally understanding all of life and the nature of reality, Mara is said to have appeared and tried to tempt the Buddha away from reaching enlightenment. And when that didn't work, he tried to scare the Buddha by throwing all kinds of weapons, which the Buddha then turned into flowers and other things. And that didn't work, so Mara sent his 5 daughters, further temptations against the Buddha, and that didn't work as well. The highlight of the battle seems to be when the Buddha did this gesture that we see here, touching the ground. It's been alternatively interpreted as spinning the wheel, but what does that mean, spinning the wheel of Dharma? He's touching the earth as witness to the truth that he has discovered. He is also, it's said in the sutras, to be calling upon the spirits or the energy which resides in the earth to help him finally conquer Mara. He was anchoring himself, if you will, to what he was doing. But the most interesting interpretation I've heard from some of the high teachers in Thailand is that he was forcing down his knee. So he's pushing himself into the earth. He's persevering. He's saying, "I'm not going to flee this confrontation." So as we read through all the various sutras, we find that Mara really comes in different forms. On one level, Mara is the personification or a deification of evil. Mara is taken from a Sanskrit word which means murderer. So we also see Mara represented as the Lord of Death. And there's nothing humans fear more than death, it turns out. So we have this deity which is evil, which sort of delights in causing us problems. We have this deity which is the cause of death and one who delights in causing death. Then we see on different levels in the scriptures, and then I think in our own practice, that Mara is really a representation of a series of compulsions or a series of psychological states. That's why Mara is considered the controller of the skandhas, the 5 skandhas, the central things which keep us from spiritual attainment. Now, in the past few years, why this has been so poignant to me is I've had so much suffering in my life. My practice became greatly disturbed, and I indeed stopped teaching Buddhism. And I went on one of my journeys and was working with a monk in Thailand. And I had the opportunity, there was a gathering about this size, and we were talking, and through a translator I was asking about anger and indeed the notion of being a failure. And the translators were having a very difficult time of it, and there was one Western nun there, and she was going to help, so she interceded. And I got some answers, and I said, Ajahn, I want to know if you've ever felt anger toward yourself. And this was really hard to translate, apparently. And then the nun turned to me and she said, You just don't understand Eastern philosophy if you think you can't ask this master if he has anger towards himself. They don't think that way. And I said, please ask the question. And there was more talk. And they said, Ajahn, he wants to know if you've ever had anger towards yourself. And he said, oh, yes. And heads were turning in the room, jaws were dropping. What's this? He said, as a matter of fact, there were times in my practice where I felt a total failure because I couldn't conquer my emotions. I couldn't get to where I wanted to get to. And at one point he became so despondent he decided to kill himself. Now, I don't think any of his followers have ever heard this. He's one of the most famous monks in Thailand, so it was fascinating to hear, but it was good for me to know that the Buddha had to continually face Mara. Teachers today have to continually face that. And everyone in their practice has to face this darkness, this series of compulsions, a series of things which thwart where we want to be. And what I began to do is a series of meditations on what I called the Dark One. I personified, if you will, or deified all of these compulsions and mental afflictions so that I had someone to have conversation with. And I should say as an aside, in deeper and deeper meditations on Mara, I realized that the Mara and the Buddha are linked. And you can't have one without the other. The Buddha being the highest example of what we can attain, and Mara being our lack of attainment. Buddha is selflessness, and Mara represents self. Buddha is fearlessness, and Mara represents fear. Buddha has escaped the cycle of existence, and therefore death. He's deathlessness. And Mara is death. Without having an enlightened mind and being encumbered in a human body, I can't really understand enlightenment. But I certainly experience temptations and desires and clinging and fears and ignorance every day. So I think that we ignore studying Mara to our peril and try to be too Buddha-like. We have to, in other words, make room in our practice. Just like we have to make room in our health program. If you're working out, you become sore, you become exhausted. Just by living, we experience sickness. And the flu and common colds and illness actually make our bodies stronger. We survive them, and we usually do. So we have to understand that Mara, a negativity, setbacks, are a natural part of the process. And I think we often don't do that. And nothing kills our joy, kills our faith, kills our spirit more than thinking we should be more perfect than we are. Does that make sense? So the past few years have been a very good experience for me, even though they've been hard. The advice that I received from one master was that, you're trying to be too much. You're still human. And you'll become enlightened only when you become enlightened. And then all of these negative aspects will drop away. Until then, you'll still need to rest in your spiritual practice as well as rest in your body. And it seems like a no-brainer. That seems very obvious. But I would ask that when you look into your own practice, are you making room for failure? Are you making room for setbacks? Or is it getting in the way? The meditation I had on Mara, I'll share this with you, is quite a personal story, but I had a conversation with this thing that I personified, this representation. Now, I come from a tantric tradition of Buddhism. So you may know that in the tantric tradition of Buddhism, we have all kinds of deities, all kinds of statues, and all kinds of paintings. And people are often taken aback and say, what are these frightening things with fangs and all sorts of things? And do you really believe in all these deities floating around? See, well, that really misses the point. These are meditational deities. And there's a trick that occurs in this kind of tantric practice. The ego, our ego, tells us that we're human, we're susceptible, we should be frightened, and therefore that's how the ego takes control. And it tries to label and identify everything. that's dangerous, that's okay, you can do this. We know that that really prevents us from experience our deeper self, our Buddha nature. Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm talking about? The ego thwarts. That, by the way, is the essence of Mara, really. The belief in a permanent, existent self that's flawed. In order to escape that chattering ego, which says that you're a limited kind of being, what Tantric Buddhism teaches is to focus on an existent energy in the universe, such as compassion. There's no way that you can look at the way you drive and go shopping and do all these things and think of yourself as the infinite, compassionate being that you are. So the trick that's played here is to have a deity that's represented in a certain way that we then empower as the essence of compassion, something that we can look to. In all tantric practice, at some point, the deity dissolves into pure light, into you, and you become that deity. So if you will, it's a trick. You start off at a place where you don't feel that you can be that great entity, that great energy, aligned with that great energy, and you end up being that great energy itself. Does that make sense? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I think, in my practice, the personification of Mara was also helpful to me. And I was able to then engage in conversation. If my practice has been so good for 26 years, and if I'm supposedly this reincarnated Lama, and I'm supposedly this, and I'm supposedly that, and the other thing, then how come I'm feeling so low? And what I discovered in one conversation, and some of you will relate to this and some of you won't, was that Mara, that dark one, that dark energy, is an intrinsic part of karma. It is the fruition of the choices that I have made and others around me have made. So I was trying to sidestep or thwart that karmic fruition. And in doing that, you're really, I don't know what the analogy would be, but you're swimming constantly against the tide. You become exhausted. You become hopeless. You become despondent. So Mara, in my meditations, said to me specifically, you have to let people experience and be responsible for the fruition of their own actions. And there was an acceptance that came over me, and there was a letting go that really allowed me, I think, to get out of the despondency I had carried for several years. That's a personal example of why I think sometimes it's important to ponder those things that we're most afraid of, whether it's death or being abandoned or whatever it is in your life, or all of those things in your life. So let me stop just throwing words out and ask you to engage me in conversation about Mara, and I think that will be a good way to proceed for the remaining time.
Thank you so much. I was reminded by much of what you said of, well, first let me start with, many people talk about Buddhism being the Eastern psychology, the Eastern approach to understanding your mind and self. And, I was reminded, as you were talking, I was thinking that in Carl Jung talks about the shadow that's a part of all of us.
Yeah.
And that Mara definitely seems to be a representation of that shadow to some or 100% extent. Jung says we need to make friends with the shadow.
Right.
That is a part of us. That's an important part of us. It's a source of energy. If we fear it and ignore it and run from it, then we get into trouble.
Yeah.
And you didn't quite say that. You didn't talk about really making friends with Mara, but I'm wondering whether you see a closeness. You see it as close as I feel it from what you were saying.
Yeah, I guess I've studied so much in the Theravadan traditions recently in my life to step away from saying make friends with it because they're so stringent about discipline and, overcoming these things, really persevering. So sometimes making friends with it means, oh, it's okay that it's there. and so you don't really make an effort to overcome. But what I do believe is that we create space for it, that there is a purpose and a utility to it, and that the more we ponder, the more we can say, for example, oh yeah, that's anger. Yeah, oh, I recognize that arose in me. Because what we often do as spiritual practitioners is we get angry, and then we get angry that we got angry. And it's that second one that really trips us up, because then we begin to lose faith in ourselves. And a central teaching that I've given so many times is that all Buddhism can be reduced to the 5 spiritual powers. And the very foundation of those, one gives rise to the next. The very foundation is faith. And that in Buddhism, faith is not faith in the Buddha to save you. He said he can't. It's not faith in your teacher who becomes your surrogate parents or something. That's not faith. Faith is in your ability to change your life by using a specific approach that is Buddhism. So we often really destroy our faith by saying, if I really was good at Buddhism, I wouldn't have gotten angry. So now I'm upset and angry that I was angry. And we tend to approach all our negative emotions that way. So giving space allows you to say, okay, I am human and I got angry. I'd like to work with that. Why did I get angry? So to do mindfulness training around the arising of those negative afflictions, the arising of Mara, if you will. There is, incidentally, a story that I've heard about Mara and Buddha, after Buddha had become enlightened, hugging each other and being friends. So I think it's not off the mark. What is the importance in Jungian philosophy to making friends with the shadow?
One, that it's an intrinsic part of everybody.
So if you make friends, if you make friends, you're just acknowledging reality.
You're acknowledging reality, but those negative parts, whether it's anger or jealousy or guilt, are actually expressions of energy, but not being used in a positive way. So if you become friends with those sources of energy, rather than getting angry at someone, maybe you can use that energy to heal a relationship. But you need to recognize that it's coming from that dark place. It could be expressed in a very negative, bad, destructive way.
Yeah.
But it's the same energy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's often said in Buddhism that, suffering, Mara or whatever, is really the motivating force. It's the impetus to change. Otherwise we wouldn't. And then, of course, I've had students say, well, why do we need to be beaten up, so badly? Can't we just be guided gently into attainment? I don't have a good answer for that. I wish that we could be gently guided, but the ego is very, very strong. It tends to be hardened like a coconut shell or something. You want the insides, you really have to bash it to open it up. And I think if you look back at any period of suffering in your life, you still may wish you didn't go through it. But by the fact that you're here, and we're really trying to do something important, I think that suffering probably informed something very important in your life, in your practice.
I think with Buddhism also, the self, not self, unity, for you to be unified within yourself, you need to be aware of all this so that you, at the same time acceptance happens, a letting go happens. You let go of allowing it control.
Right.
And a separateness.
Yeah, thank you for that.
There's one question here.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Thank you for presenting a different way with the purpose of, deification. I really like that because I always felt sort of like I lacked integrity if I went there because I really believe in the unification of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But so you sort of helped me at least bridge the gap there as far as church. But what my question is, I didn't follow you when you were talking about how you will help, in the tantric tradition, you have these deities, but then in that that you become one with them, and then you sought to deify Mara.
Mm-hmm.
And so was your intent to become Mara?
No. All tantric practices are scripted out so that you end up chanting the instructions of what you're doing. So you're you're verbalizing what you're going through. And the end of those practices that existent energy, let me back up a little bit and say that it's a bit like shining light through a prism. Because when we talk about loving kindness and we talk about compassion, we talk about supreme self-confidence, these sort of existent energies, they're all together in the universe. But you can shine them through a prism and separate them into their different strands for the purpose of working on it or examining it. So Tantric Buddhism will have a deity or deification for loving kindness and transcendental wisdom and compassion, and also in the form of Tara, the supreme self-confidence or faith in oneself. In order to be aligned with or filled with that energy, we have to sidestep our ego, because you can't come from it. That's a facsimile experience of spirituality. That's a spiritual materialism of the ego. You have to step outside of that and really experience these energies through your Buddha nature or some deeper nature, some higher wisdom. So this is a process of doing that by saying, okay, you're compassion and I can see that. You're the absolute embodiment of compassion. I can't see that in my own life because, yesterday I got angry. So it's kind of hard to convince myself that I am. So I can bow down and supplicate and really raise up my awareness of this energy. But in the end, you'll dissolve into light and filter through my body, my chakras. And I'll become looking inside, looking outward towards the world. I'll become that force, that energy. My intention in personifying Mara was a bit different. It was so that I could have conversation with. So I guess it would be a similar process of that empowering my mental image of what Mara would look like, so that I can explore it. But it wasn't my intention to become pure evil. That just happens on its own.
First of all, thank you for what you had to say. It was enlightening. And I wanted to both comment and question one thing, which was actually not what you said, but your comment that the Theravada tradition is focused on overcoming. And it struck me first as inconsistent with my experience in a number of teachers, but it also struck me as inconsistent with the basic story of the Buddha and Mara, in which the Buddha puts his head in Mara's mouth in which he invites Mara to tea. These don't seem overcoming, they seem more becoming friends with. And in terms of teachings, and I've just had some intense experience around this, which is thinking about it. But in terms of the teaching, the thoughts I have are from, I can't remember if it was Stephen Levine or Thich Nhat Hanh, that acceptance is magic. Or from S, which became the farm and landmark, what you resist persists. Or from Tara Brach's text, which is entitled Radical Acceptance. And I think she quotes in there, or maybe it was Pema Chodron quotes somebody who put up a little note at a sitting that the essence of Buddhism is to accept everything in every moment as it arises. And so my own experience around this recently is around the ending of a 10-year relationship and not wanting to experience bad feelings around this naturally. There were certainly some there, but on the whole they were sort of not too strong. And then in the last couple of weeks, and it sort of hopefully peaked yesterday, it arose, and more intensively, and then during the middle of the night when I woke up and I couldn't sleep, and when I was running obsessively on, I went through Stephen Levine's meditation on heavy states, and I didn't do it terribly heavily, but even the degree to which I did it, and the suggestion that he has of, if you can't let yourself put your head in the jaws, then and pay attention to your thoughts and feelings, then notice your body sensations, because that's more feasible. And so I did that, and even doing it not terribly heavily, it seems like the fever is largely broken. But I believe that it was only, that I didn't want to do it right away, perhaps wisely. It was only by going through that we got there. And the other thing I would suspect that, possibly wrongly, that here, like 12-step fellowships, that there may be nobody in this room who would be here if they hadn't experienced suffering. I suspect that there's maybe there are people who came here just because they thought, well, this would be fun, and lovelier. But we could take a show of hands, but my guess is there aren't many at any rate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Comment?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you said. My original comment about Theravadan approach to discipline, I think generally speaking, it's true that there's more of an emphasis on overcoming that. But there is also a recognition that we are human and that things arise, and that once they do, we shouldn't beat ourselves up with it. And I think that's extremely important as we're trying to have a successful practice. And another thing is that it's okay before you become angry to say, don't get angry. Or before you become upset to say, don't get upset, and to talk with yourself about it. And to prepare in advance for situations where you know you get angry or upset. That's really important in our practice. We often don't do that. I mean, we're having a great day. Why do we want to prepare for our anger or hostility? But that's when we have the energy to do it. But once we become angry, there are a lot of things that happen. Not just in our mind, in our spirit, but, our body. Like when we become angry, adrenaline starts shooting into our body. Now, everybody can tell you to calm down, and you can use methods to calm yourself down, but can you step from that into some advanced meditation on wisdom? I don't think so. I don't think it's the right time. So giving yourself the space to say sometimes, okay, well, I'm going to be angry right now, because that's where I'm at, rather than saying I absolutely should not hold this emotion. But I'm going to try to react in skillful ways. I'm going to use this is very tantric, by the way. I'm going to use the energy incumbent in anger, but I'm going to burn a channel into my brain, which shows that you can use negative energy and have a positive outcome. It's a very hard thing to do when you're in the midst of that emotion. But it sounds like that's indeed kind of, you were making a deal, or you were making space for what you were feeling and saying, I'm going to ride this fever out until it breaks.
Yeah, and underlying it, of course, is the basic concept of impermanence. Accept it, don't accept it, it'll still...
That's right.
I was just curious to hear more about that sense of, I think I heard you mention this, but that sense of powerlessness one faces when facing someone else's suffering, and wanting to do something about it, but not necessarily being able to, and how you resolve that.
Not so much. I know that can also be really hard, the powerlessness. But I think in my own practice, it's thinking I'm too powerful, that I can intercede and I can take away that person's suffering, that I can prevent them, whether it's just providing money or continual counseling or whatever. Not allowing that person to feel the true depth of the outcome of the decisions that they made. That's thinking you're too powerful. And in fact, you are powerless. And what this one particular meditation conversation with Mara did was to say, you can't do this. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be trying to intercede in the natural fruition of their actions. So I guess a very, very crude way of putting it would be tough love. I mean, you still love the person, but you love them enough to step back and let them experience what they need to experience. So Mara was saying, I am not evil. I'm not coming into people's lives to harm them. I am bringing them the results of the actions that they made. And sometimes we see that as a devilish, fiendish, act. But it isn't. It's a natural rolling of the wheel. Does that answer? Do you want to talk more about powerlessness?
Well, to me, You know, I understand what you're saying about powerfulness, but I think they were related because when I get that sense of powerlessness, it's because I thought I was powerful enough to do something,
Right.
and then I try, and then it doesn't work.
Do you feel that usually in relation to like an individual or on a larger scale, like sort of a compassion fatigue? Like there's so many people dying in Africa and there's tsunami victims.
Some compassion fatigue, mostly with individuals, family members. I do counseling in the jail, so a lot of that.
Yeah. And what does the sense of powerlessness do when it arises?
It makes me kind of numb, actually. Or rather, I think I make myself numb so as not to deal with it.
I think one of the examples I carry with me that helps me out in that situation is I had a lot of discussions with the Supreme Patriarch of Cambodia, Mahago Sananda. And he was in Thailand studying in a forest when the genocide was raging in Cambodia, his country, and his entire family was killed and all his friends and everybody he knew, and everything was devastated in that society. And they were getting reports, and so he was quite despondent. And his master, Ajahn Chah, was telling him, the only thing that you can do right now is to prepare yourself for a time when you can help rebuild, when you can do something positive. So again, it's taking, I think, adding more space to the equation so that you don't just say, I'm powerless right now and I'm so frustrated for being powerless, I can't do anything. But the more you prepare yourself and make yourself stronger and better and able to provide guidance, and then add to that a number of years so that you see that there will be a time when you will be able to do something more. Then you're not so powerless. But I agree, if you're looking just... And this is the thing, I was told very clearly, if you take the past and you try to correct the past, you have no future, and you may as well not live. You can't live your mind in the past or the narrow confines of viewing the present through the past. That is, all the negative experiences that happen to you. Oh, this is terrible. This is going to happen tomorrow too. Once we get into that kind of thinking, we have no future. And without a future, we have no reason to live, and we lose faith. So, the practice is often making friends with, I think, our past. And we can have a certain moral regret, which is that we don't want to repeat the mistakes that we've made. But beating ourselves up for the past, and maybe that's a conversation for a different day, but that is a key hindrance to a successful practice, I think.
I saw Paul and then...
Yeah, I was thinking about my own relationship with Mara, and there's two things. And one is that I've been doing psychotherapy on and off for 30 years, and the last round that started 3 years ago, I became really aware on a visceral level how I was suffering from PTSD from a physically and verbally abusive father. And, what you just said recently about if we think about our past and feel trapped by it, it's not really a mental construct. It's so deeply embedded in me that it sours a lot of attempts to stay above it. Because the feeling, it's just hard for me to distance from the feeling. When I get scared, and the bigger a challenge is, the more fearful I get. And I've accomplished a whole lot in my life, but it would have been really nice if I could have accomplished it without so much dread. I mean, I got a PhD, and those exams were like hell. Please, put me out of my misery. It's just ridiculous. And I was in Thailand recently, and I really loved the murals in the temple. I didn't get a chance. I was on a group tour, and I didn't get a chance to really look at them. But what really kind of disturbed me, because I wasn't aware of it, was the representation of Mara, because it's in the myth. the Buddha, and it reminded me of the Christian concept of devil. And the way my unenlightened mind works at its worst time is that the devil really is as powerful as the good, and that the devil is not, the devil's not an inferior being. And I just didn't like seeing Mara represented because it triggered this relationship I have with the Christian idea of the devil. Yeah. So maybe you could give me a start in trying to unwind that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a logical thing to do because it's a representation of evil. But when we think about sin, when we think about evil, when we think about achievement in Buddhism, it's different than in Christianity. You should see it. You should try to see it differently. Sin is, or non-virtuous activity, is that which thwarts your progress, and that may be different for every individual. Virtue are those activities which lead to your spiritual attainment. They are not these things that we do in order to please the Buddha or to please God. And I think we carry vestiges of that into our Buddhist practice. So we try to be good in order to please God. And also, for some people that were really ingrained in Christianity or other traditions, the devil's going to get you if you act in bad ways. The story here is that you are today, right now, whole and perfect on a very deep level. Perhaps it's hidden to you and it appears sometimes. Our practice is really to get rid of all the layers of things that prevent you from living your life and experiencing Buddha nature, Tathagata Garb. So Mara is that, on one level, sloth, laziness, indolence, anything that keeps you from doing a practice. And on another level, Mara is the deification or the way of understanding in one block the opposite to spiritual attainment. And what I'm proposing is that it might be helpful for some people to take all of those things as thwarting their practice and personify it in a way that's comfortable with you. It could be a kindly-looking old man, but he doesn't wish you well in your spiritual attainment. And then have a conversation with that personification. It'll work for some, it won't work for others. Does that sound something you might explore?
Yeah. I've had a lot of training in drama therapy and psychodrama. There's a lot of exercises in that modality where you speak to your negative forces. It can be very useful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. It can be very powerful. And unexpected answers can come up as a way of showing you out of your particular set of circumstances where you're at right now.
I just wanted to say, you seem to have a very good way of putting things very succinctly in a nutshell. And I was hoping that this will be a transcript which you can read. I was particularly like what you said about not being trapped by the past in reference to that. And with respect to this young man's question, what you said also triggered off to me that, in my own thinking, the frustration that we can have because it's so difficult to help people. And sometimes we just want to give up or we don't know what to do. And we try and try. We can use that frustration actually to want to be enlightened, because if we became enlightened, we would actually be able to help people who are so difficult. We may think, okay, I have a background in psychology or something, or I can help someone. So no, you can help them a little bit, but it's really hard. But if we could say, okay, all that frustration, all that longing to want to be of some value, we could use that to inspire ourselves to practice more.
Yeah. There's one Buddhist story that reminds me of where this guy on his way to work every day passed this guy who would yell at him you stink, you say all these terrible things, and he'd get mad every day at this guy. And this kept going on, and finally one day he was walking with his neighbors and other people in the village, and this happened. And they all laughed, and he got angry. And they said, "Oh, don't you know him? He's out of his mind. He's crazy." And suddenly the guy who had been angry every day said, "Oh, that's why he's yelling at me. Oh, okay, then it's acceptable." See, this letting go, this acceptance for sometimes negative things that are hurled at us. When we know the causes and conditions of them, then they no longer really have power over us.
Yeah, I have a question about addiction. It seems like it's such a commonplace psychological state for human beings to slip into. It just seems like it's just part of, an intrinsic part of human nature to slip into addictive behavior.
Yeah.
And I heard once it be described as we all have an inner urge towards enlightenment. That in order to achieve true enlightenment, we can transcend our ego, and we all identify with our ego, and if we kill the ego, we kill ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do all this false enlightenment, like enlightenment through alcohol, drugs, or sexual. That way we get satisfied this urge towards moving towards enlightenment. At the same time, we have to hold on to our egos, but of course, it never really happens.
Yeah.
And I just wanted you to talk about addictive psychology and how you deal with that in a way where you're not constantly spinning your wheels and going back and doing the same behavior over and over again.
Well, as far as substances and things like that, I marvel sometimes that I don't have an addictive personality with all that stuff. Because, one day, like drinking a lot of alcohol or something just to shut up your brain is so appealing. Why wouldn't I want to do that every day? I don't know. So sometimes I marvel at that. But I think you're dead on what you say about the ego. The ego has a central myth, and that is that it's going to protect you and keep you well. That's its role. Ego, by the way, we can personify that as well, couldn't we? I mean, it's really a set of processes of the brain which intends to keep you secure. And so the central premise is that it can do that. That's actually a myth. There's two kinds of suffering. There's two kinds of dukkha in Buddhism, generally speaking. And one is the natural suffering we feel when bad things happen to us. Or, maybe on a more mundane level when we're hungry or thirsty or whatever. But there's another kind of dukkha, and that is that we're not aligned with our deeper nature. So that even if everything was perfect in our lives, looks perfect on paper, we can still feel a sense of suffering. That is something the ego can never provide for. So there are two times, I think, when we recognize this myth of the ego. One time is when we're in some kind of deep spiritual practice and we have sidestepped it through great efforts, through great control over the mind and mindfulness, concentration and wisdom. And another time is when we're in very deep despondency. Because if the ego's premise is, I'll keep you safe, collect all these things about you, see yourself in this way, all the other things the ego does. But now you're still wanting to jump off the bridge or kill yourself, the ego has to admit that it failed, that it doesn't work. So there are a lot of stories of great saints in Buddhism who only found enlightenment when they were about to slit their throats or kill themselves. That's when they were finally open to understanding the falsity of the ego. And I think we often try to destroy self, try to destroy the different kinds of suffering with drugs or alcohol or whatever to get into a different sort of state. But that doesn't work either, because that's really being driven by the ego or even a desire to kill the ego as you know it, to fundamentally change it. Follow on?
No, I mean, it's a topic you can spend hours discussing.
Yeah.
It just seems, I mean, we mentioned about the shadow side earlier, and I see another reason why you might want to become friends with the shadows because it's so easy to, if you're dishonest about the shadow, to just project it onto all these other different people and then persecute them because you can't acknowledge the shadow of yourself.
Yeah.
I think all of the living examples of having shadows projected on us by people who are scared of their own sexuality.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's just so it's a pitfall. It's almost like Pilgrim's Progress by a guy, where you're trying to go down this road to get to Celestial City, and it's so easy to fall into a pit and cast out a giant despair, or to be seduced into the town of vanity. There's all this stuff that just keeps you from walking down that path, which should be a pretty simple thing.
Right. Right. But I think one of the points made too is that falling in the pit makes you want to get up and go down the road further. Like it's a wonderful fantasy that it's just a straight walk to the palace, just to get there and we're enlightened. But we're being pushed and we're being pulled. We're being pushed by Mara, or suffering, and we're being pulled by our Buddha nature. That which you want to become is the thing that's informing your search. So we have that strange. That's a characteristic of human existence. We are covered in all these kinds of compulsions and strange myths and everything that really cause us suffering. And at the same time, when you peel all that away, everything you need to be, you already are. So I think that also helps. There's some of this confusion out there with so much self-help. And you turn on sometimes Channel 9 or whatever, and you have somebody talking about, you just got to find your inner wizard and all this stuff, and you're fine. Well, we're not fine. We have these two things. We have what we want to be, and that sometimes it pops out, and sometimes we go for weeks or months really being informed by our Buddha nature, and things are good, and we're having movement. And other times we're really being pushed along by our experience of suffering, or the opposite of our spiritual attainment. And we know that we have the two kinds of dukkha there. We're suffering because of the negativity or mental negative afflictions, and we're suffering because we're not that higher being that we're not living our life as that higher being that we know we are.
I think that is well said. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for seeing you again. I appreciate it. It's good seeing you all. Thank you.
And we're going to close here in a few minutes. Scott, we wonder if you could grace us with a blessing.
Grace us with a blessing.
Yes. So you have some time to ponder those profound words of blessing upon us, with us. So time for announcements within the Sangha.
Yes. I have an update on the annual retreat, which is planned on September 16th through 18th at Vajrapani. Jim Wilson, who has been the teacher at the retreat for the past several years, is not available. But we just found out that the Jising Norman In, who recently came and did a program for us, has agreed to lead the retreat with Roger Collis. So he has a lot of experience in leading retreat, and we're very lucky to have him as a teacher. And by the way, Jising and Roger Collis are calling themselves Buddha Boy and Dharma Daddy, the dynamic duo. So we can look forward to that. Thank you.
It's on my calendar right now.
We're going to have an outing on Sunday, June 12th, from 7 to 9 p.m. Rena Surka, who's a Burmese follower of the 10 Precepts, has a monastery here at Dolores and 21st Street. And so we're planning an event for GBF, and I'll have to take names because there's a meal involved. They're going to have a light meal and then a Dharma talk and meditation, and questions. And one of the reasons we're doing it is that because she follows the 10 Precepts, she can't come during our normal time because this is her lunchtime. So if you want to visit this Burmese nun, let me know. I'll be taking names and stuff. And announcing it.
Thank you, Paul.
There's a steering committee meeting today, immediately following this meeting, And anyone's invited. The steering committee talks about concerns of the fellowship, business of the fellowship. And today we're going to be talking about the All Sangha meeting notes that we collected. There was an All Sangha meeting in this room about 6 weeks ago, called an All Sangha meeting, where people got to say what they comment on the goings on of the fellowship. So we'll be responding to that today, and anyone's invited to come today.
Thank you. Our host. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm our host.
Oh, great. Good.
So if you're new and you have any questions, feel free to come and ask me. There'll be a Donegal going around, and I will volunteer to pass the crowd. Sure. Thank you. We suggest $5 to help us pay for the space. Also, there's some snacks out there and tea. If you borrow a cup, please wash it, turn it, and try to feed the mice crumbs and such. Anything else? This is my first time hosting, so that's all I can remember to say.
Doing well. So some folks gather afterwards for lunch, so if you're interested in gathering for lunch, you can, I forgot your name.
Jay.
You can congregate around Jay. See what evolves. George.
Yes, and a reminder that our talks are available on the internet at the GBF website, gaybuddhist.org.
Recordings?
Yes, indeed.
Oh my gosh. I should have practiced.
It's way public now.
And for the new folks, I hope the sign-up sheets should be outside near where the Donegal sits when it's not being passed around, and you can put your name, address, phone number, email, something on there to make sure you stay in touch. We stay in touch.
Again, please put your email and home address and phone number, if you would, not just your email address. We might this year try to compile a directory.
And stand and take one another's hand.
Where do you want to stand?
I'll stand here. That's me? Okay. Well, it's our intention gathering here today in studying the precious Dharma that all beings, all creatures, whether they're seen or unseen, whether they're great or small, whether they're diminutive or magnificent, whether they're born or yet to be born, that they have happiness and the causes which lead to happiness. And one final blessing that Ajahn Jamnian gives to people, which is up, up, up. So when your spirits become low, try to tell yourself up, up, up. When your consciousness becomes low, try to raise it up, up, up. When someone does something that makes you angry, try to change your awareness from your limbic system to your cerebral cortex, which is up, up, up. And imagine the Buddha in his head pointing up, up, up. So that's my blessing to you from Ajahn Jamnian. And please go out into the world and pass it along and tell people up, up, up.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.